Okay, so what does dust on your sensor look like as far as your images go? How do you know you have a problem? So I've got a couple pictures here where I have a piece of dust in the upper right corner of my image. So you can see here, um, picture of a speedboat on a lake, but up in this region, I have got three pretty sizable dusts and even one up here in the top right. So that is what dust looks like. And you can see one of the reasons you know it's an issue is if you can see it in multiple images. So I've got another picture here, and I've got it here. And one of the things you might also notice is that it kind of changes. Like this is almost the same picture. Here it's pretty blurry. Here it's a little bit more defined. But they're always a little blurry because they're actually it's a piece of dust right on the sensor where the image and the light falls to to create that well, it's really a voltage differential that ends up being turned into a um, light information in red, green, and blue channels. But that all happens in your camera. But one of the things I want to mention is a high aperture. So if you're testing this out, a good way to do it is take a photograph of a blue sky or use some uniform like a wall or something like that. The focus actually doesn't matter. You just want something that's very blank and plain, so it's easy to pick out an irregularity like a dust spot. And then try to use a very high aperture, so like f22, because that'll make them less blurry and more easy to see.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about how to clean those also precious sensors, which is what holds on to your image and turns it into a digital photograph. Obviously, it's a very sensitive part of the camera. Usually, we're going to talk about all these different parts of it. So I first just want to talk about a little bit about the preciousness of it, right? So when you have a camera and you take off the lens, and I'm just going to do this now to this camera. If it's an SLR style camera, it's going to have a mirror there that allows you to look through the back and down and out through the lens, right? Single lens reflex allows you to see what actually the camera's seeing. If you have a rangefinder style camera or a mirrorless style, then there may be a viewfinder, but it's an electronic viewfinder, and so you're just seeing what the sensor sees. Either way, right now I can't see that sensor, but if I have a setting on here, I have my bulb setting, I have a long exposure, but you can see here, this is my sensor. It's in the back that it's revealed once the shutter goes up and the mirror goes up. But that's, it's a very delicate part of the camera. We want to be very careful when we're cleaning it, but you can get dust on it, right? And as we saw, and there's 3 steps, but I just wanted to first point out that if we scratch the surface of that somehow, then we will mar every photograph that's taken. Not to scare us, but to also just respect that. The best way to not get dust in here is, of course, to try to keep that camera closed, the camera body closed off all the time. So if you happen to have a time when you're going to change lenses, you just try to find a way to minimize how long it takes you to change the lenses, so that's not open and to the environment, because that's when dust can float by and get trapped in there. If you do have dust in there, there's some steps, right? So we're going to go through those. So the first step is preparing your camera. How do you actually figure out what do you do? A lot of cameras have a special setting on them. So this camera, for example, if I go to the menu and I come to one of this up here, I can come to one of the, I see, I have a whole bunch of different screens, right? But one of these screens for settings that has to do with management is sensor cleaning. And so if I come into this, it actually gives me an auto cleaning function, which I have normally enabled, which is basically an ultrasonic vibration mechanism. It just makes the sensor shake just a little bit to try to dislodge any dust from it. It has a clean now option, which basically manually turns that ultrasonic vibration on. And then I have this thing that says clean manually. And the clean manually is what the setting we're going to want to use if we're going to get in there and do some cleaning manually ourselves. You need to have your battery fully charged. So if I select this, it'll say, if my battery was not charged like it wasn't yesterday, it just says not enough battery power, I'm not going to do this. But it says mirror will lock up after manually cleaning sensor, turn off, power switch off. Now some cameras have these settings, so you want to look for them if possible. Some may not have them, and that's okay too. If your camera doesn't have one of these, then probably what you're going to do is you want to find a way that you're definitely not going to be doing something in there over the sensor when a mirror closes back down on it, because that could damage parts of the camera. So, you know, I have a setting here, the maximum time that I can get this to stay open is 30 seconds. So I could do something like that, do 30 seconds at a time, or maybe even better would be to use my bulb mode. And then as long as this button is pressed down, the sensor is going to stay open, right? So I could hold with one hand the button down, and the other I could do any of the cleaning functions. Now, if you have a rangefinder camera, or what's normally called a mirrorless style camera, you may just be able to turn off the camera, take the lens off, and clean. So this Hasselblad X1D, I can just open the camera lens and there's the sensor right there. And I just cleaned that one, so I'm going to put it back on really fast. But in that case, I don't have a special cleaning function that's built into this camera. It doesn't really need it, right? Because the sensor is always available, because there's no mirror there to take it off. And in this case, this has a shutter that's built into the lens rather than to the camera body. But other rangefinders, you want to make sure to read the instructions, because if they do have a shutter mechanism that opens and closes in front of the sensor, and you do have the camera on and it somehow that moves back down again, that could be damaged if you've got your if you've got any kind of accessories or tools like these that you're using to clean the sensor with. So just beware and make sure it's safe on your camera model before you do this. But I should also say, if the camera's off, if the sensor is exposed, you can clean it manually without fear that something is all of a sudden going to happen because the camera's off. So what are the steps to actually removing dust from your camera? Well, first try the auto cleaning to see if that helps. Second, you want to use some kind of blower that's going to blow air in there to try to dislodge it. So I have this canned air here, which is ozone safe, but this is not something that you want to use with your sensor, because sometimes if you turn this, if this is inverted and it's basically compressed, it's a compressed volatile gas, it's not just air. And even though it's clean, when it comes out, sometimes if it's inverted, it'll actually leave a little bit of residue on something. And we just won't want to do that. The last thing we want to do is stain our sensor. So this is the next version. It's just a pneumatic brush, and when it has a little nozzle at the end, and then when you push it, it blows air around. So this is our first step. And the second step involves buying a sensor cleaning kit. And you want to try to buy the sensor cleaning wands that are the same size as your sensor. So you kind of have to know a little bit about your camera to know which is the right one. Now the camera I'm going to clean has a full frame sensor, so I bought the ones for the full frame, which is 24 millimeters wide. So what's inside this? It's kind of a little box like this, and I have all these kind of hermetically sealed wands like this. And there's actually a little bit of fabric on these, and these are single use. And what you do is, if your sensor was, say, right here, you'd bring this in and you'd pull across like this to try to remove the dust. And then you can use the other side once, and then that's it. Okay, and that's why you have multiple sensor swabs. That would be step 2. We would just do that dry with the swab. And then step 3 was if you're still having issues with dust, then you would take a little bit of the sensor cleaner and put a couple drops on the edge like this. It's kind of hard to tell that it's even there, but I have made it just a little moist, and then you can delicately go over your sensor with the brush. You don't want to do this really hard. You want to do this very lightly but consistently. So okay, so now we're going to go through that process with the actual camera. Another thing that was in this that was helpful were actual good instructions. But there's multiple companies that sell these. I purchased mine on Amazon. You can also purchase it at a camera store. And another thing to just point out is if you don't feel really comfortable with this process, you can have somebody do it. Most camera stores have a professional that will clean your sensor. But I think it's handy to just know how this works and how to approach this. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my sensor cleaning. I'm going to say clean manually, and I'm going to click OK. And now what's going to happen is my camera is going to lock open the sensor. So I can open this up. And the first thing I want to do is be able to see this well. So one of the things you might need to do is change the way your light is coming. So I'm going to change just my light here so I can see a little bit more directly into this sensor and purposes. So here I can kind of get a sense of the sensor, and I really want to look really carefully at it to see if there's any dust on there. And I can actually see a couple pieces. So the first thing is you want to try to dislodge just with air. Okay, so and you can imagine one of the things that might make this easier is if you hold this sideways rather than open like this, sitting on top of a horizontal surface like a table. But this may be enough to do what you need to do, and just get rid of some of the dust. So I'm going to hold this upside down and give it a going over. But if you're still finding that you have an issue, then the next step will be to take one of these swabs, open it up, and pull this out. And so what I'm going to do is this is the same width as what I have, and so I'm just going to come in here, come down, and gently pull this across like this. And then I'm going to flip it over, and I'm going to go the opposite way. And then I'm going to put my lens back on. And then in this case, in this camera, I'm going to turn it off so that it reboots. And once I've used this, I don't know, maybe you can think of something else useful to do dusting wise, but you don't want to reuse this on the camera in case that you actually might reintroduce the dust. You also want to be careful that these edges kind of sharp on this side, but this side that actually touches the sensor is quite soft. And that's pretty much it. What you would do now is you would find like a blue sky or a background with that's very uniform, like white, and you want to take a test image with your camera. Doesn't so much matter that it's in focus, but you do want to use a high aperture if you can, a high aperture number, because that'll make the dust spot more visually apparent to you in the camera. In the resulting picture, then you just want to take a look at it, preferably on a computer screen where you have a lot of, you can see all the detail, and just make sure you don't see any dust, dark black spots, a little bit fuzzy, that are indicative of dust. So I hope that is helpful, and now you can make sure if you get some dust, know how to clean it out of there. I think a lot of you will find that just using some type of blower brush, which you can get at a camera shop or online camera store. You could probably get it at a place like Amazon as well. This actually will do the job most of the time.